In Krypton, Jor-El and Krypton's ruling council pass judgment on General Zod and his two allies. The council unanimously decides to find them guilty of the crimes of treason and subterfuge. Jor-El is the last councilman to condemn them, and General Zod pleads with him to reject the council's decision and then join him as his second in command. Jor-El banishes all of them to the Phantom Zone. After that, Jor-El turns to the council. They consoled him for taking such a hard stance against General Zod. Jor-El, however, thinks they are better off than those who will die on this planet in 30 days. The head of the council refuses to listen to him and denies his scientific conclusions. They order him to keep his mouth shut and promise that he and his wife will not leave Krypton, despite its impending doom. In his lab, Jor-El secretly prepares a pod for his newborn son, Kal-El. He plans to put him on a ship and send him off to planet Earth. His mother questions why Earth exists, and Jor-El says they are thousands of years behind them in civilization, and their son will need that advantage to adapt. To humans, he will be like a god with superhuman powers. The council is also monitoring Jor-El, and it has been discovered that a lot of energy is consumed in his laboratory. They decide to investigate and detain him, but the Red Sun is getting too close to Krypton. Before any of the officers can reach him and arrest him, planet Krypton begins to get destroyed. Jor-El puts his son into the spaceship together with original Kryptonian technology to aid him in his education while on Earth. Kal-El is then sent off to the planet, while the planet is destroyed behind him. He passes Zod and his allies imprisoned in the Phantom Zone on the way, and they cry for help but cannot be heard. Years pass and Kal-El grows in the pod while listening to his father's recordings. He finally arrives on Earth, where Mr. and Mrs. Kent are driving home. He crashes into a field nearby. The impact causes a puncture, and the Kent truck veers off the road. Jonathan and Martha head to the site and find a young boy coming out of the spaceship. While fixing the tire, Martha mulls over how the child might be an alien. Jonathan does not believe her. Suddenly, a mishap happens and the car Jonathan is trying to fix almost crashes down on him. A young Clark holds up the entire truck effortlessly. Jonathan looks at Martha dumbfounded. Years later, Clark is now a teenager at Smallville High, and he cleans up after the school football team. He likes Lana Lang and approaches her after the game, but her friends quickly boo her away and she has to leave. Clark is angry that he cannot show off his abilities to anyone on the football team. On his way home, he chases their car back. A young Louise Lane sees him from a train window and tells her parents, but they don't believe her. Clark reaches home and Lana and her friends pass by her again. Lana wonders how Clark came home so fast. He simply replies that he just ran. His father, Jonathan, escorts him back to the house and he encourages Clark not to be too swept up by the pressures of his teenage years. He has much more to do than use his powers to play football. He leaves his father behind and heads to the barn, but Jonathan gets a stroke and falls on the footpath. Martha screams from her place on the balcony. A few days later, a funeral is held for Jonathan Kent, and a few people who knew him attend the ceremony. Clark consoles his mother. The next morning, Clark wakes up early after being urged on by a certain voice from the barn. He enters the barn and finds his old spaceship hidden by his father under the barn. Martha wakes up alone in her house and tries to find Clark. He is already out in the fields, looking at the rising sun. His mother comes to him knowingly, and he informs her he has to leave. He has asked the neighbor to help keep watch over the farm. Martha only replies that she knew this day would come, and wishes him well. Clark journeys north to Antarctica and finds a fortress built by his father's technology from Krypton. The fortress is to teach him about his home world and everything he needs to know to survive. It takes him 12 whole years to learn everything. In Metropolis, Clark is wearing a suit and tie and has been newly hired for a job at the Daily Planet as a reporter. Perry White, the editor, assigns Lois Lane to teach him the ropes. After their first day, Clark accompanies Lois outside the office and they are immediately mugged at gunpoint on the streets. Clark uses his superpowers to secretly deal with the thief. But he wonders why Louise would fight for her handbag when she doesn't have anything important. On the same street, Lex Luthor's accomplice, Odious, passes by, and two officers on patrol notice him and begin to follow him. They follow him into a train station in hopes of also nailing Lex Luthor, his boss. They follow him onto the railway tracks, and he quickly makes his exit when a train passes by. Lex is watching from a camera as the officer tries to follow Odious. He pushes a button and the officer is thrown onto the track of an incoming train. Odious comes inside Luthor's lair, where we find him and Miss Tessmaker living a great life in the city. He reads the paper about the government's plan to test nuclear missiles in California and has Odious feed his babies. Miss Tessmaker, however, is anxious and wants to go outside and see the city. Louise Lane has an assignment as a presidential assistant that will take her to interview the president and will take a chopper to the base of Air Force One. She refuses to fly with Clark and instead has him post some mail for her. But during takeoff, one of the landing ropes entangled the helicopter, and the helicopter almost toppled off the top of the building. The pilot faints after hitting his head, and Louise is hanging perilously from the chopper's side. Soon, she falls down the building after being unable to hold on, and people look from below helplessly. Clark gets out of the Daily Planet and finds people screaming. When he looks up at the building, it is Louise hanging off an almost crashing helicopter. He finds a nearby hotel, quickly changes his clothes to his Superman costume, and then flies up the building, rescuing Louise and the helicopter with the pilot fainting in it. It is the first time Superman has been introduced to the public. From that day on, Superman goes around the city, rescuing people and stopping crime. Meanwhile, Perry White is livid and wants his reporters to get inside information on Superman. Superman then visits Louise Lane that evening and gives some information about his background. He also takes the young woman on a trip around the skies of Metropolis. The next day, the papers are rife with the story of Superman and his background as an alien. Lex Luthor reads the Daily Planet and is determined to bring down Superman. He concludes that there might have been fragments from the exploding Krypton that might have reached Earth. He digs through his books and finds an unusual meteorite shower that was discovered in Ethiopia in 1948. Luthor immediately sent for it. Lex and his team of Odious and Miss Tessmaker then head out to intercept the government's nuclear missile deployment test. Using a remote-controlled car, Miss Tessmaker plays pretend as an injured civilian lying on the road while soldiers are transporting the first missile. The convoy of soldiers delivering the bomb stopped and tried to help by administering mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on the beach by the roadside. Odious sneaks behind them underneath the bomb and changes the coordinates. Mr. Luthor then comes by as a medic and picks up Mrs. Tessmaker. She is beginning to get tired of the soldiers. They return to their van, but Luthor discovers that Odious made a mistake in entering the coordinates. They have to do it again on the next bomb being shipped. They blocked the road this time with a huge house load. While Luthor and Odious distract the officers, Miss Tessmaker inputs the coordinates on the bomb again, successfully this time. Luthor, using a frequency that only dogs and aliens like Superman can hear, informs Superman of his plan to destroy the current city of California. Superman, who was then at work as a reporter at the Daily Planet, quickly follows the sound and pays Luthor a visit at the bottom of the city. He dives into Luthor's underground bank. He is invisible to all the traps that Luthor has set for him, but Luthor goads Superman with a story of how he has planned to destroy the city with 2 nuclear bombs. Before Superman can leave to stop the bombs, Luthor tricks him into opening a box containing kryptonite. This immediately weakens Superman and he hangs the rock with a chain around his neck and throws him into the pool. Meanwhile, Luis is in the backwoods of California on a story about land, grabbing and interviewing Indian natives, when one of the bombs hits, causing a huge earthquake. The government is in disarray, but Miss Tessmaker frees Superman in secret behind Luthor's back, and he quickly goes to save the city. Luthor, who had been watching the proceedings from his office, quickly wonders what is happening when one of the bombs is stopped. He immediately suspects Miss Tessmaker. Superman manages to stop one of the missiles, but the other has already hit, and it causes a massive earthquake in California that traps Louise and her photographer, Jimmy. Superman comes to California and manages to stop the earthquake. He rescues Jimmy, but it is too late to save Louise, and she dies trapped in her car wreckage. He is distraught and goes against his father's wish not to interfere with Earth's history, and reverses time by going around the planet several times in a flash. He then goes back to rescue Louise and also to save Miss Tessmaker, who is almost being served Luthor's babies as food. He then delivers Luthor and Odious to the warden at a maximum security prison. The film ends with Superman flying over the planet happily. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to our channel. I'll be back with another interesting movie recap. Until then, take care.